The Astronomican falters. Across the dark void of the Imperium, its light flickers like the dying breath of a god. For 10,000 years, its pulse has guided ships through the warp, a heartbeat of golden fire born from the sacrifice of the Emperor himself. Yet tonight, on Terra, the air trembles with a sound no mortal has heard since the siege, a whisper beneath the hum of the golden throne. Tech priests freeze mid-chant, servo arms locking in reverent terror. Custodians, those statues of gold and silence, turn their helmed gazes toward the throne room as the walls seem to breathe. Deep beneath the palace, within the ancient veins of machinery and faith, the impossible stirs. The Emperor, the corpse that rules a million worlds, has moved, not by the hand of man nor the will of demon, but by something deeper, older, woven into the marrow of creation itself. The Imperium does not know yet, but the dawn that comes will not be made of light. For millennia, they have prayed he would awaken. Now as the first tremor echoes through the vaults of the Golden Throne, they must ask the question they never dared to complete. What happens when he does? Call to action, integrated. If the thought chills your veins, if the silence before a god's breath makes you wonder what remains of man in such a galaxy, stay with me. Like the faithful of Terra, we will descend together into the heart of myth and metal. As you listen, lend this story your faith. Like the flicker of a lumen globe in a forgotten manufactorum, your voice, your like, your share, your presence, helps the signal reach across the void. Now listen, and watch the throne begin to stir. They said the Golden Throne never moved, that it was as constant as the mountain beneath it, as silent as the dead god who sat upon it. Yet on that day the mountain itself seemed to breathe. In the deepest vaults beneath the imperial palace, where light fell like dust and prayer was older than air, the endless hum of the machine changed pitch, by a fraction, a heartbeat, a deviation so small no human ear could have noticed. But there were no humans here, not in the way mortals understood. There were only servitors, half flesh, half worship, chanting through corrupted vox grills, their mouths shaped around liturgies of maintenance older than recorded history. There were red-robed priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, their eyes replaced with augmetic lenses, their flesh veined with the sacred steel of the Omnissiah, and there was one, a nameless engineer whose hands shook as the air around him began to hum. At first, he thought it was error, a misalignment in the quantum harmonics of the reactor's hymn, a deviation in the throne's plasma feed. He tapped a rune on his data slate and saw the readings fluctuate wildly, the graphs rewriting themselves as if possessed by the hand of a machine spirit gone mad. The throne's energy flux, unmeasurable for 10,000 years, now pulsed in waves, as though the device itself were breathing. But the throne was not merely a machine. It was a god engine, a wound in reality, a prison and a lifeline all at once. The engineer dropped to his knees, his metallic fingers pressing into the grating. Static whispered in his ear like a forgotten prayer. He moves. He did not know if the voice was external or from within his own neural implants. He tore his gaze upward toward the dim expanse of the chamber, vast enough to swallow cathedrals whole. Above him, cables thick as city streets vanished into the shadows, feeding into the impossible architecture of the Golden Throne itself. He could not see the Emperor's form, not truly. None could. The throne was an ocean of metal, a fractal labyrinth of divine geometry that hid the withered god at its heart. But tonight he felt something alive behind the metal, not just power, presence. At that same moment, far above, in the outer sanctum of the throne room, a custodian turned his head. For an outsider, that gesture would mean nothing. But for one of the 10,000, beings bred and sculpted to stand eternally unmoving in the presence of divinity, a single motion was an act of seismic weight. The custodian was called Acastian, bearer of the auric halberd, vigil of Saul. For centuries, he had stood upon the obsidian steps leading toward the dais, watching over the motionless form of the Emperor as incense and chanting drowned the air in golden haze. He had not spoken in 70 years. He had not moved in 20. Yet now, beneath the echo of prayers, he felt it, the faintest vibration beneath his boots, a tremor crawling through the marble bones of the throne. Acastian's helm lenses flared gold as his internal sensors recalibrated. The seismic readings confirmed it, a pulse, faint but rhythmic. Not the movement of tectonic plates, not the motion of machinery. It was biological, He turned his head slightly toward the Magos Dominus who oversaw the throne's outer systems. The Mechanicus priest was already trembling, his mechadendrites coiling like frightened serpents. Through the sacred haze, Acastian saw the priest's optics dim in disbelief. A moment later, the Magos whispered through his vox, his voice fractured by static and awe. The pulse matches a cardiac rhythm. The words echoed across the sanctum like a heresy. The choir of 1,000 psychers faltered mid-hymn, their voices splintering into silence. The air grew heavy, thick with the weight of something unspoken. Somewhere deep within the throne's mechanical heart, a light flickered, a single lumen rune that had lain dead for millennia. It blinked once, twice. Then it stayed on. The custodian took one slow step forward. The throne responded. A hum rolled through the chamber like a sigh exhaled through the bones of a world. A faint wave of warmth radiated outward, brushing against the custodian's armor. He could feel it even through layers of auramite. Not heat, not light, but life. His twin hearts stuttered. The golden lenses of his helm dimmed slightly as he whispered, barely audible even to himself. "It awakens." Across the vastness of the palace, the tremor spread. Deep in the cathedrams of the administratum, data clerks froze mid-recitation as their cogitators spat streams of corrupted numbers. In the vaults of the Scholastica Psychana, astropaths screamed, clutching their temples as their inner sight was flooded with impossible radiance. The Astronomican flared, a surge so bright that ships a sector away thought the warp itself had ignited. Then, as quickly as it came, it dimmed again, flickering like a candle in the wind. Within the throne room, the silence returned, but it was not the same silence as before. It was charged, alive, trembling with a tension that no one dared break. The air tasted of ozone and sanctified oil. The incense burned unevenly, the flames bending toward the dais as though drawn by breath. Acastian turned his gaze upward, and though his helm sensors dimmed to protect his vision, he thought, or perhaps only hoped, that he saw movement. The faintest shift of a finger, a whisper of cloth, a stir of light against bone. And then, from the depths of the machine came a sound no mortal had heard since the age of apostasy. A heartbeat. Slow, immense, echoing through the air like thunder beneath stone. Once, twice. Then silence again. The custodian knelt. Beneath him, the world trembled. The engineer's mind could not process what he had just witnessed. His augmetics screamed data, his lenses flooded with golden interference patterns. But beneath all the machine logic and sacred mathematics, his flesh, his pitiful, forgotten flesh, felt the tremor of divinity. He fell forward onto his hands, weeping coolant and blood alike, the scent of both mingling in the recycled air like incense and decay. He wanted to cry out, to praise the Omnissiah, to shout the litany of renewal that the Mechanicus had not dared to voice since Mars itself was young. But fear sealed his voice. To name what was happening would be to commit a heresy older than time. For if the throne moved, if the God-Emperor's body lived, then the entire foundation of the Mechanicus belief, that he was one with the machine god, would be shattered. He crawled forward on shaking limbs, reaching toward the nearest column of the throne's superstructure. The metal was warm, not the warmth of energy transference nor the heat of power flow. This was something else, a living warmth, pulsing faintly like blood through a vein. He felt it through his augmetic fingertips and gasped as a jolt of power surged through him. 1,000 voices whispered across his neural interface, too fast to separate, too deep to comprehend. In that instant, he saw flashes of things that should not be seen. Endless desert plains beneath two suns, the cry of a child in a forgotten age, legions of warriors marching beneath a banner of thunder. He saw Terra before it was Terra, and in that vision he saw him, not as God nor as corpse, but as man. Human, fallible, infinite. Then the visions died, replaced by a silence so heavy it nearly crushed his mind. When he awoke, he was not alone. The custodian stood before him, his armor glowing faintly in the half-light of the throne's core. The gold of his plate caught the scattered lumens and refracted them into spectral halos, painting him like an angel sculpted from divine wrath. The engineer's mouth opened in reflexive praise, but the custodian raised a hand, silencing him. His voice, when it came, was low and resonant, like the echo of a cathedral bell. "You saw it too. The engine seer's vocalizer sputtered. I saw error, divine signal. Omnissiah's breath, not error, said Acastian. Not signal, will. The word hung in the air like a blade. The engine seer flinched, his vox grill crackling with static as his mind reeled. Will. That word was forbidden when spoken of the throne. The Emperor's body was not meant to have will. It was a conduit, a focus, a divine corpse whose power sustained the Imperium. But now, as the cables trembled and the runes flared, the possibility of will became terrifyingly real. Acastian turned his gaze toward the dais, his sensors flickering with distortion. The Emperor's form was lost beyond the brilliance shrouded in machinery and faith, but somewhere within that impossible light something ancient stirred, a consciousness vast and silent, older than empire, older than the stars. And for a fraction of a second it looked back. The custodian froze, his dual hearts hammering, for he felt, not through his senses, not through his armor, but through something deeper, older, in the marrow of his soul, that the Emperor saw him. In that gaze was no warmth, no cruelty, no recognition. It was the gaze of a being so far beyond comprehension that mercy and indifference had become the same thing. It was the gaze of creation looking upon dust and remembering what it once was. Acastian dropped to one knee, his halberd grounded before him, his armor whispering against the stone. The engine seer followed suit, pressing his forehead to the floor, whispering a prayer in binary through sobs of static. Then, as if in answer, the throne spoke, not in words, but in sound, a resonance that filled the air, vibrating through metal and bone alike. It was neither mechanical nor psychic, neither chant nor scream. It was a harmonic tone, deep and ancient, echoing through the vast network of cables and conduits. The light from the throne intensified, flooding the chamber in gold until it burned against the eyes. The engine seer screamed and shielded his face. Acastian stood unmoving, though the radiance scorched his armor, and then, just as suddenly, it was gone. Darkness fell, absolute and suffocating. The only sound was the faint ticking of cooling metal and the hiss of servitor breath. The engine seer's optics flickered weakly back to life, his vision resolving into shapes and shadows. The custodian was still kneeling, his halberd embedded in the floor, steam rising from his pauldrons. The throne was silent once more. The light that had burned like a miniature sun was now reduced to a single dim glow at its heart, a pulse, faint but steady. Tell no one, Acastian said, his voice a quiet thunder in the void. Not the Magi, not the choir, not even your own god machines. The engine seer nodded frantically, though fear consumed him. What was it? The custodian turned his helm toward the golden silhouette upon the dais. The beginning, he said, or the end. Beyond them, deep in the corridors of the palace, alarms whispered to life, soft, hidden, encoded. Vox links flickered. Servitors halted mid-task, their movements twitching, their eyes rolling white as the machine spirits within them cried out in confusion. Across the throne's network, hundreds of thousands of circuits rerouted themselves as if preparing for something vast. Somewhere in the blackness of the Imperium, astropathic transmissions flared, reaching blindly through the warp. Most burned out within seconds, consumed by the tides of unreality. But only one made it through. It was not a message. It was a scream, and far beyond Terra in the endless night between the stars something answered. In the hours that followed, Terra itself seemed to hold its breath. The skies above the imperial palace churned with storm clouds black as ash, lightning crawling silently across the horizon like serpents of pale gold. The void shield dome shimmered, strained by energies no one could define. From the spires of the ecclesiarchy to the depths of the vaults of Raython, rumors began to spread. Whispers carried on static and prayer alike. Servitors collapsed mid-chant, their flesh blackened by surges of power, Fox lines filled with incoherent binary. The silence of 10,000 years was breaking, and no one could decide whether to rejoice or despair. Acastian walked through the throne's lower sanctum, his footsteps echoing against the marble in perfect rhythm with the heartbeat that still pulsed, faint but constant, through the floor. Around him, the Mechanicus adepts labored in hushed chaos. Some recited emergency litanies over sparking conduits. Others bled oil and faith in equal measure as they recalibrated the sacred machinery. But Acastian did not join their rituals. He had seen enough rituals. He had watched countless generations of tech priests come and go, their flesh decaying while their machines endured. None of them had ever dared to question the throne. Until now, none had reason. He stopped before the engine seer. The same trembling acolyte from before, now seated against a column, his body half covered in diagnostic cables. His augmetic eye flickered, trying to focus through streams of data cascading across his vision. Acastian spoke, his tone measured, emotionless. "Report." The engine seer shuddered. "The throne's power signature has changed. The plasma flow has recalibrated itself. Circuits once dormant have reignited without command protocols. There is intention, machine spirit activity beyond recorded parameters." "Intention," Acastian repeated. The word felt strange upon his tongue, as though language itself hesitated to contain it. "You mean awareness, I mean will," the engine seer whispered. "It's communicating through harmonics. Not binary, not psychic resonance, something else." Acastian turned away, his gaze settling on the impossible structure ahead. A labyrinth of gold and steel, radiant with the faint heartbeat that came from within. The air shimmered as if alive, reality bending at the edges of perception. The custodian's mind, sculpted by centuries of mental fortitude, refused to yield to fear. Yet some ancient primal part of him, something older than his engineered perfection, trembled. He had stood at the Emperor's side once, long ago, before the galaxy was drowned in fire. He had seen the master of mankind in flesh and glory, his eyes alight with purpose, and now millennia later, as the throne murmured and the light trembled, Acastian felt the same presence stirring. But it was not the Emperor he remembered. This was different, fragmented, vast, impersonal. A god reawakening not into mercy or wrath, but into something beyond both. It was as if the universe itself had remembered its maker. "Custodian," a voice rasped behind him. The Magos Dominus, lord of the throne Mechanicum, hovered near, his servo limbs quivering. His voice was filtered through a dozen vox mandibles, layering into a mechanical chorus. "What you have seen cannot leave this sanctum." Acastian did not turn. "It already has." The Magos' optics flared crimson. "Explain." The Astronomican flared moments after the pulse, Acastian said. "Astropathic screams have reached Segmentum Solar. They will reach Mars next." "You cannot contain faith," the Magos hissed, his vox tone sharpening to a machine snarl. "Faith is irrelevant. Stability is all. The Imperium cannot survive uncertainty. If the throne has changed, we must define it, measure it, control it." Acastian turned now, his helm lenses reflecting the crimson light of the Magos' eyes. "Control the Emperor?" he said quietly. "You speak of control as though it were possible, as though the divine were a component to be recalibrated." "Blasphemy is a matter of definition," the Magos replied. "I serve the Omnissiah's logic." "And I," Acastian said, stepping forward until their forms nearly touched, "serve the Omnissiah's flesh." The silence between them hummed like the string of a drawn bow. For a moment, the world felt balanced on the edge of a breath. Then the throne spoke again. A single deep resonance that rattled every circuit, every bone, every prayer in the chamber. The light returned, but this time it did not blind. It revealed. The walls shimmered, the runes flickering alive one by one, cascading outward in spirals of sacred geometry. The engine seer screamed as his augmetics overloaded, his mind flooded with impossible streams of data, coordinates, names, memories. Across his neural display flashed the map of the galaxy, then a single glowing mark at its center. Terra. It pulsed in rhythm with the throne's heartbeat. "What is it showing?" Acastian demanded, his voice sharp as a blade. The engine seer gasped through static. "Not showing. Summoning." The custodian's eyes narrowed behind his helm. "Summoning what?" And then the air tore. The custodian turned his gaze toward the darkness beyond the throne, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then he remembers." And far below, the dead began to dream. The vaults beneath the imperial palace were not made for mortals. They were carved from stone older than the Imperium itself, black rock reinforced with layers of adamantium and faith. Every door bore the imperial aquila and 1,000 seals of warding. Every corridor was watched by silent cherubim, their wings broken, but their eyes alive with flickering code. There were things down here that even the Inquisition did not speak of, things left to rot in the dark because to remember them was to invite madness. Yet now, in those endless depths, something stirred. Acastian moved through the labyrinth of maintenance shafts, his golden armor leaving faint trails of light across the dust-caked walls. His internal comms were dead. Even the Custodians' encrypted VoxNet could not reach this far below. Only the sound of his footsteps and the slow, steady pulse of the throne filled the void. The air was thick with the stench of oil and incense, the residue of 10,000 years of burnt offerings. He passed statues eroded by time, saints, and heroes forgotten by name but remembered by posture, kneeling, pleading, broken. Each figure seemed to turn its gaze toward him as he walked. He ignored them. He had seen statues weep before. He had come here once, centuries ago, as a guardian escorting the Fabricator General himself. That day, he had sworn never to return. But now, guided by instinct more than command, he descended again into the heart of the Emperor's buried secrets. The corridors grew narrower, the air colder. He could feel the throne's heartbeat even here, a low vibration in the stone, as if the planet itself were echoing its rhythm. Then without warning, the hum shifted. His visor dimmed as his sensors screamed interference. The world flickered. For a moment, the corridor stretched into infinity, then snapped back. Warp interference? Impossible. The palace was shielded, sanctified, protected by psychic wards layered thicker than the crust of worlds. Yet the impossible was happening. He drew his halberd. The weapon thrummed with contained energy, its edge shimmering faintly as if eager for purpose. A sound came from ahead, not mechanical, not human. A breath. Acastian froze, his body locking into combat readiness. The sound came again, soft, labored, dragging against stone. He moved forward in silence, every motion calculated, his armor whispering like gold cloth. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. Ancient stasis pods lined the walls, their surfaces clouded with frost and age. Most were dead, their power conduits long severed. But one glowed faintly, light pulsing in rhythm with the throne's own. He approached, the glow painting his armor in amber. Through the misted glass, a shape lay within, humanoid, but not human. Larger, broader, its frame unnatural in proportion. Tubes threaded into its flesh. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, revealing veins that shimmered like liquid light. Its eyes were closed, but the lids trembled as if dreaming. The nameplate at the base of the pod was worn nearly smooth, but Acastian could still make out the letters carved there, their edges burned by time. Alecto. He took a step back, disbelief washing through him like cold fire. The legends had been true. The prototype that had never been born, the first failure of the Primarch gene project, sealed away before the others were even scattered through the warp. The Emperor himself had ordered it entombed, its name erased from all archives. And yet, it lived. The pod hissed, releasing a thin stream of vapor. Acastian raised his halberd. "By decree of the Emperor of Mankind," he said softly, voice echoing through the dark, "you were never meant to awaken." The eyes opened. They were not the eyes of a man or a Primarch. They glowed with the molten hue of dawn, burning gold over black. For a heartbeat, the figure did not move. Then, with a sound like tearing fabric, the stasis seals cracked. Energy flared, bathing the chamber in light. Acastian shielded his faceplate as the pod shattered, shards of transparent alloy scattering across the floor like diamonds. When the light faded, the being within was gone. "Vigil of Sul, report." A voice crackled suddenly through his vox. It was the Magos Dominus, his tone fractured by static. "We read power fluctuations across the lower vaults. Containment fields failing. Respond." Acastian turned slowly, scanning the shadows. "Contact," he said. Movement flickered at the edge of perception. Too fast, too silent. His armor's auspex registered displacement but no form. The air grew thick, charged with the metallic tang of ozone. Then the whisper came, not from the vox, but from the world itself, vibrating through the air and the bone. "You left me in the dark. The custodian moved instinctively, halberd raised. "Show yourself." "You served him," the voice said. Female, resonant, filled with something between sorrow and rage. "And when he buried me, you turned your eyes away." A shape began to emerge from the gloom. Tall, humanoid, skin glowing faintly with inner light. The face was half covered in metallic plating, the eyes burning gold. "I remember you, Golden One," she said. "I remember your silence." Acastian tightened his grip on his weapon. "You are a relic," he said. "A fragment of a failed age." She smiled, not cruelly, but with the melancholy of one who has already seen the end. "And you," she said, "are a monument to one still dying." In the distance, the throne pulsed again. The light from its heartbeat rippled down through, the stone illuminating the chamber like dawn bleeding through the cracks of eternity. The being, Alecto, lifted her gaze toward the ceiling as if she could feel it. "He stirs," she whispered. "At last." Acastian took a step forward. "You will stand down," he said, voice steady. "By his will, you were sealed. By his will, I will end you if necessary." "His will?" she said softly, her voice trembling with something deeper than mockery. "You think his will ended when he fell upon that throne? No, Custodian. The Emperor's will was never bound to flesh." The throne's hum deepened, shaking dust from the ceiling. The statues along the walls cracked, their faces breaking apart as though rejecting the silence of centuries. Alecto turned toward Acastian, her eyes burning brighter. "The storm has begun, and when he rises, all your golden silence will mean nothing." He lunged. His halberd met her hand and the world screamed. The chamber erupted in light as gold met gold, custodian against forgotten creation, faith against memory. Sparks of psychic fire danced across the air, and for a moment, both stood, locked in stillness, their strength equal, their wills unbending. Then came the shockwave, hurling Acastian backward into the wall. He hit the ground hard, his armor splitting along the seam of his shoulder. Alecto stood unmoving, her expression unreadable. "You cannot stop what has already begun," she said. Then she vanished, dissolving into light that bled into the stone. Above, the throne's heartbeat thundered once, twice, and the lights of the palace flickered across Terra. For the first time in 10,000 years, the God Emperor had dreamed. And somewhere in that dream, something answered. Across the void, the Astronomican flickered. Its light, that eternal flame of the Emperor's soul, shuddered like a candle caught in a storm. Millions of ships adrift in the warp felt it all at once, a faltering in the beacon that had never failed. Navigators screamed, their third eyes bleeding light, while astropaths across the segmentum solar convulsed as visions tore through their minds. Visions of gold, of stone, of a heartbeat echoing through endless dark. The Imperium did not yet know it, but the pulse of Terra had reached them. And somewhere in that rhythm, the galaxy began to awaken. On Mars, the forges howled. In the deep manufactoria of the Red Planet, where rivers of molten metal flowed like blood through veins of iron, the priests of the Omnissiah felt the tremor before any signal arrived. Data towers flickered. Canticles of stability dissolved into static. The machine god's voice, long silent save through ritual, now sang through their minds in patterns that defied their logic. The Magi gathered in the Noctis Forge, their robes of red reflecting the furnace light, their mechadendrites twitching like restless serpents. A single phrase repeated itself across every data stream, whispered by every servo skull etched into every screen. "He moves." Archmagos Lutheran, his skull half replaced by an adamantine helm, stood before the great cogitator shrine and felt the vibration beneath his boots. He had served for 400 years, his mind grafted to logic engines older than most worlds, and never had he felt uncertainty. Until now. "Verify source," he commanded, his voice a chorus of metallic layers. The response came not from his subordinates, but from the machine itself. The cogitator's rune display flared gold, and a voice, and soft, harmonic, almost human, replied, Source, Terra, Origin, the throne Mechanicum. Lutheran's organic eye widened. The throne? Impossible. It has no vocal output. But even as he spoke, the screen shifted, displaying sigils no adept had seen since the dark age of technology. Across Mars, servitors began to malfunction, some weeping tears of molten metal, others uttering garbled hymns of creation. Entire assembly lines halted as the machine spirits within refused to obey commands. It was as though the entire Mechanicus itself was listening. Waiting, Lutheran felt the fear he had forgotten he could feel. The Omnissiah was their god, the machine their cathedral, yet the presence that now stirred within those circuits felt older. A command written into the engineer who had first seen the movement knelt before the machine, his body stripped of extraneous augmetics. He was little more than a shell now, rebuilt for obedience. Yet as he recited the maintenance litanies, his voice trembled. He could still hear the heartbeat beneath the throne, faint but alive. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of light, fragments of a voice not his own whispering through his mind. You will remember. Acastian watched him for a moment before turning his gaze upward to the vast, shadowed form that sat immobile upon the dais. The Emperor's body, bound within the machinery, seemed no different than before, a corpse of light and legend. Yet something in the air had changed. He could feel it even without his armor's sensors. It was the same subtle shift he had once felt before the storming of a world, the moment before battle when the air itself seemed to anticipate blood. He spoke quietly, though his voice echoed through the chamber. He dreams again. The Magos turned sharply, his servo limbs clattering. Blasphemy. It is truth, said Acastian. Truth, the Magos hissed, is irrelevant. What matters is order. If the Imperium believes he lives, it will devour itself in zealotry. And if it learns he dies, it will collapse in despair. The illusion sustains us. The illusion, Acastian replied, is ending. Their words hung in the sacred air, between incense and silence. Neither man, if man they could still be called, and moved. Then, without warning, the throne pulsed again. The light flared brighter than before, casting both figures in gold. The Magos stumbled back, vox crackling with feedback. The engineer fell to the floor, crying out as energy arced through his body. Through the roar of the machine, Acastian heard something. A whisper so faint it might have been the echo of his own thoughts. Yet it was not his voice. It was deep, layered, resonant. A voice that had spoken once to a galaxy and commanded gods. Why? Do you still kneel? The custodian froze. The words reverberated inside his mind, not through sound but through meaning itself. His vision blurred. For a moment he saw nothing but light, golden and endless, and within it the silhouette of a man seated upon a throne not of metal but of stars. He fell to one knee. His breath came in shallow bursts. My lord? But there was no answer. Only the slow return of darkness and the sound of the Magos screaming for his adepts to record everything, as if recording the divine could preserve sanity. In that moment, the Emperor's heartbeat quickened. The black ship Orison drifted like a coffin through a sea of knives, its hull scarred by 1,000 hunts, its hold stacked with quieted voices that once howled with the warp's hunger. In the sanctum of its astropathic choir, Sister Astropath Seraphine knelt with her hands folded over a data bead rosary, eyelids stitched with purity seals that fluttered at each breath. She had survived a century of tides that broke lesser minds, but the pulse from Terra reached her like a bell struck inside her skull. She tasted burned copper. She heard the hiss of oil over hot iron. She smelled ozone and incense and something older than prayer. Then the image rose, unbidden and merciless. A throne that was not a machine, a man who was not a corpse, and a breath that was not air, but memory. She did not scream. She whispered, and her whisper cracked the lacquered quiet of the choir. He dreams. The navigator on the Orison staggered in his blister dome, the third eye clamped shut by reflex as the Astronomican surged and guttered, a tide that did not obey its charts. The ship bucked. Geller fields keened. Chains rattled on the psyker pins below as the unsleeping cargo stirred. The wardens ran, boots like hammers, and for a moment the entire vessel felt like a heart trying to remember how to beat. The master of the orison made the sign of the Aquila and ordered full burn away from the red glare of a storm blooming on the horizon of unreality. The engines obeyed, though their machine spirits rasped a single word through the cogitators with every firing cycle, as if air itself had learned to speak. Terra. On the forge world of Mars, Archmagos Lutheran's sanctum filled with heat haze and cold dread. He had sealed the forges by decree, but the forges sang beneath his seals. He had cut the relays, but the relays braided themselves anew in patterns his logic could not predict. Across the Noctis plain, a cohort of Skitari halted mid-stride as their visors filled with a glyph that did not exist in any catechism, a perfect circle pricked by a vertical line of light, pulsing in a cadence indistinguishable from a heartbeat. Lutheran addressed the great shrine cogitator with the formality of a man who knows he stands before a judge. "Define the anomaly," he intoned, voice layered and metallic. The reply came in harmonics that arranged themselves into language at the edge of comprehension. Origin, sol, vector, palace, nature, volition. He should have recoiled at the word, but instead he found his organic hand flexing, as if it remembered tools before blessings. The omnissiah had always been a word for a mystery the Mechanicus pretended to map. Now the mystery rapped its knuckles on the door. On Terra, the administratum's cathedra of numbers suffered a different miracle. Scribes raised from birth to fear smudges on parchment, stared at cogitators birthing figures that refused to remain still. Projections of tithes, death tallies, grain shipments, voidcraft losses, all of it shifted in real time, as if the future had entered the room and demanded a seat. A junior adept, ink on his fingers and awe on his face, held out a sheaf toward a superior, who could not see for the tears fogging his augmetic lenses. Each column had resolved to a single repeated digit like a chant written as arithmetic. 1, 1, 1. The superior tried to speak a reprimand and discovered prayer instead. The Inquisition felt it last because certainty dulls the skin. A Lord Inquisitor in sable robes knelt beside a slain heretic on a rain-swept balcony and studied the corpse with the indifference of a butcher. The pulse reached him even there, a pressure behind the eyes, a throb in old scar tissue. He rose with the stiffness of an oath. Terra whispered beneath the rain. He did not need astrotelemetry to know the direction. His retinue turned as he turned, and for the first time in decades he adjusted the weight of his rosette as if it had grown heavy. "Dispatch the writs," he said. "Burn rumors. Bury prophets. Prepare the quiet that follows thunder." He paused, hearing the thunder roll through stone across a world he had not yet reached. "And pray," he added, not to be heard, and hated that the word fit his mouth. In the throne's shadow, Acastian stood so still he could have been another golden statue abandoned by time. The Magos Dominus prowled like a cage of spiders, issuing orders whose echoes were smaller than the hum they tried to master. The engine seer, stripped and rebuilt for obedience, mouthed litanies that would not align, as if the syllables themselves had become miscalibrated. Acastian's senses unfurled through armor and air, through incense and static, and found the rhythm again. It had changed. It no longer mimicked mere biology. The beat now carried rests that felt like thought. He remembered the word the throne had breathed and the vault where the word had become flesh, and the weight of a name he had not dared to believe he would hear again. He tasted dust as if the vault's stones lay on his tongue. He heard metal weep. He did not look back when the Magos addressed him. The Mechanicus voice was all edges. "You will affirm that no anomaly persists. Your oath binds you to containment." Acastian let silence be his answer until the silence grew teeth. He spoke at last without turning. "My oath binds me to him." The Magos rasped a catechism of authority and found it hollow. Acastian felt the hollow too and did not pretend otherwise. They were two pillars set to hold up a sky learning to move. The Astronomican surged again. Seraphine on the orison fell forward, palms pressed to cold deck, and behind her eyes a vision returned with new detail. She saw Terra's mountains like clenched fists, the palace spread like a continent of scars, the throne not as a thing but as a wound through which light fell in a slow, patient rain. The rain soaked into a desert where a child once walked alone. The child's shadow was longer than the world. She reached toward it and her fingers met heat. When she woke, the deck smelled of ozone and old books. A warder called her name once, twice, and retreated when she answered by reciting a prayer she had never learned. Each line finishing on the same heartbeat that thundered faint and far. One for the living, one for the dead, one for the road between. In the underways of a hive spire on a distant world, a conscript of the Astra Militarum paused with ration tin halfway to his mouth, as lumen strips sputtered and steadied in time to a rhythm he could not name. He thought of his mother's breath when fever took her, the way the chest rises and falls until it decides. He did not know Terra. He did not know the throne. He knew only that the world had found a metronome, and his hands stopped shaking for the first time since the press gangs came. He ate in 3 beats and slept in 3 and woke with a smile that had nothing to do with hope and everything to do with order. Archmagos. Lutheran placed his living palm upon cold steel and felt warmth answer from the deep. For a moment he permitted the heresy of metaphor to enter his mind, as if a hand pressed back from the other side of creation. A chime sounded that existed in no schema, and the shrine cogitator displayed a single line as clear as sunrise. Awaiting instruction, he could order the forges to resist, to calcify, to turn their faces. The sound was faint, distant, like thunder beyond a mountain range, but it was growing closer. The Emperor's heartbeat had become steady now, not sporadic, not dying. With each pulse, the golden light within the throne deepened, spreading outward in veins that crawled across the marble floor, crawling toward Acastian like roots of molten light. He did not move, even as the heat rose, even as the light licked at his boots and climbed the curve of his armor. It did not burn. It blessed. For the first time in 10 millennia, the custodian felt warmth, not from fire, but from presence. Then came the voice again, soft as breath. Deep as a world's core, they still kneel. It was not heard through ears. It arrived through the blood, through the very pattern of his thoughts. The voice filled his head, vast and sorrowful, and Acastian fell to one knee, unable to do otherwise. "My lord," he whispered, though his throat burned with reverence and fear alike. "You live." A pause, and then laughter. Not cruel, not mad, but the kind of laughter that breaks stone. "Live," the voice said. "I endure. There is a difference." The custodian dared to lift his head, though his vision blurred from the radiance. "Then why now, my lord? Why stir the stars after silence eternal?" For a moment there was only the hum of the throne, the whine of servitors twitching in half-conscious worship. Then the answer came, not as speech but as thought made flesh. "Because the dream has curdled. The galaxy burns, and still they pray to fire. I built an empire of men, and they turned it into a cathedral of ghosts." Acastian's heart clenched. He had never heard blasphemy in the Emperor's tongue before. Yet there it was, not anger but regret, echoing through the bones of reality itself. The custodian bowed his head lower, armor scraping against the stone. "What would you have of us, then?" The light dimmed. For a moment, Acastian thought he saw movement within the throne, a silhouette shifting behind the machinery, a shape too vast to be wholly flesh. When the voice came again, it was smaller, quieter, almost human. "Watch, wait, the first will awaken soon." "The first?" Acastian whispered. "The one I buried, the one I feared. She dreams beneath the stone, and through her my shadow will rise before I do." Acastian's breath caught. He knew that name, though he had buried it behind centuries of silence. Alecto. The forgotten, the sealed, the prototype. The Emperor's first attempt at godhood made flesh. He had seen her eyes in the vault and felt her power hum like the echo of the throne itself. "You remember her," he said softly. "She walks again." A sound, half sigh, half sorrow, filled the chamber. "Then my time is shorter than I thought." The golden veins pulsed faster, spreading outward, burning symbols into the marble, ancient sigils of unity, conquest, and fire. Acastian felt his armor vibrate with the power of them. And somewhere deep below the palace, something answered in kind, the rhythm of another heartbeat, not divine, but powerful enough to challenge divinity itself. The custodian turned toward the vast doors of the sanctum. "Then she comes," he murmured. The air changed again. This time it carried scent. Not incense, not ozone, but smoke. The smoke of forges, of burning worlds. The throne's light dimmed as shadows lengthened across the dais. In that darkness, for an instant, Acastian saw her, and tall, radiant, terrible. Alecto stood at the threshold of the machine, her eyes reflecting the dying glow of the throne. "He calls," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade through silk. "And you still guard his prison?" "It is not prison," Acastian replied. "It is life." "Then you do not understand what he is anymore." Her steps echoed like falling hammers. Each one left a faint trail of light behind her. The machinery around the throne shivered as if recognizing her. The engineer convulsed at her presence, his body flickering between prayer and seizure. "You should not be here," Acastian said, halberd raised. "Your existence was forbidden." She smiled faintly, tilting her head. So was his resurrection. And then the light behind her died. The chamber went black. For a heartbeat all was silence. Then the Emperor's voice filled the void once more, louder now, like thunder breaking inside the mind. "Enough." The word struck the air like a weapon. The floor cracked. The banners turned to ash. Alecto fell to one knee, trembling not in fear but recognition. The throne blazed, pure white fire consuming the walls, the stone, the air. Acastian was thrown back by the force, crashing against the far wall, armor splitting. He looked up through the haze and saw it. A hand, skeletal and radiant, rising from the golden machinery. The hand of the Emperor, moving for the first time in 10,000 years. The light surged outward, crossing continents, seas, the void itself. Across the Imperium, the faithful screamed in ecstasy. The heretics burned where they stood. The warp screamed in defiance, but even it could not drown the sound of the divine heartbeat returning. And above it all, in that blazing brilliance, the Emperor's voice rang again. Soft, infinite, inescapable, my children, you have forgotten what it means to be awake. For a spanless instant, the throne room was no longer a place. It was a sun, not the gentle blaze of distant warmth, but the devouring brilliance of a god remembering itself. The very geometry of the chamber folded and unfolded, walls breathing like lungs of gold and shadow, servitors disintegrated mid-prayer, their flesh reduced to ash that drifted upward like incense into eternity. The engineer's body convulsed, his soul burning away like a paper in flame as his last coherent thought dissolved into gratitude. The Magos Dominus, hidden behind layers of shielding and denial, wept molten tears as his augmetics melted under the radiance. His final data entry before blindness took him was a single word, repeated until the cogitator shorted. Resurgent. Acastian rose through the storm of light, his armor cracked, his breath raw. He was not designed for worship. Custodians were built to protect, to obey, to endure. Yet what he saw before him demanded none of those things, only surrender. The Emperor's form was still buried within the vast labyrinth of the throne, his face unseen, his body entombed within the machinery of godhood. But now the machinery itself was alive. Cables writhed like veins, energy flared from vents like golden blood. The entire structure pulsed, every conduit beating in sync with a cosmic rhythm that transcended time itself. And above that terrible music came his voice, fractured between the divine and the human, a sound that was not heard but experienced. I feel again. Acastian fell to one knee, his helm retracting, his face pale in the golden fire. You have returned, he whispered, though even as he said it, he knew the truth was more complicated. Return implied distance, and the Emperor had never been gone. What he witnessed now was not resurrection. It was memory. The god remembering the man. The light shifted, dimming, then coiling inward as if the throne itself exhaled. Alecto stood unmoving, the glow of her skin reduced to faint embers. Her face was unreadable, caught between awe and grief. You still bind yourself to this, she said, her voice trembling. Even now you remain prisoner to the machine you built. The Emperor's presence seemed to turn toward her, not physically, but perceptibly. I built a bridge, not a cage. A bridge to what? She asked. You have crossed no stars in 10,000 years. You have ruled in silence while men kill in your name. They are my burden, came the reply, each syllable heavy as thunder. And their consequence. The word struck Acastian like blows. He had spent his immortal life guarding this place, believing in a divine plan beyond mortal comprehension. Yet the tone of the Emperor's voice was not divine. It was weary, regretful, almost human. Acastian dared to speak, though his voice was barely more than a whisper. My lord, and if this burden has grown beyond even you, what would you have us do? For the first time, silence. Long, infinite silence, then came the answer, quiet as dust. Remember. The word resonated through the chamber like a blade cutting air. Remember. It was command and revelation both. In that single word, the custodian felt entire histories unfurl within his mind. Visions of the Great Crusade, of Terra before the smoke, of men and women who built empires not with faith, but with fire and will. He saw the Emperor as he had been, mortal flesh flawed yet unbroken, bearing not holiness but purpose. He saw the dream, unity, reason, the liberation of mankind, and he saw how it had been buried beneath millennia of superstition. Every cathedral, every creed, every saint carved in his name was a layer of stone over a forgotten truth. Humanity had buried its own beginning beneath worship. Alecto staggered, clutching her temples as if the memory seared her mind. "He shows you too," she gasped. "The age before gods." "I see," Acastian said softly, though tears now streaked the dust across his face. "I see what we have become." The light around the throne dimmed further, receding like the tide. The golden veins upon the floor began to cool, leaving only the faint glow of embers. For a fleeting instant, the world felt still again. The heartbeat slowed. The air steadied. Yet the silence that followed was not peacing. It was suspense, the space between thunder and echo. Then came the tremor. It started as a ripple beneath the marble, subtle, almost uncertain. But then it deepened, spreading outward through the palace, through the mountain itself, through the crust of Terra. Vox channels exploded in static across the planet. Spires cracked. Pilgrims outside the sanctum fell to their knees as the earth beneath them groaned. Across the void, Will dissolved. He saw everything. The flicker of stars born from dust, the long march of men across ruin, the slow heartbeat of humanity stretching across eternity. And in that endless panorama, he saw him not the corpse upon the throne, not the god who ruled through silence, but the figure who had walked among men, a mortal of infinite will and finite flesh, golden-eyed, ageless, yet burdened with the sorrow of every world he saved and failed. The Emperor stood upon no dais now. He was everywhere and nowhere, both the dreamer and the dream. "Acastian," the voice said. It was not thunder anymore. It was gentle, human. "You have served me through time and darkness. You have seen my empire become a monument to fear. You have watched faith replace thought. Tell me, what do you see now?" The custodian tried to speak, but words no longer obeyed his tongue. He formed thoughts instead, and those thoughts became light. "I see truth, my lord. I see that we worshipped the shell and forgot the soul." "Then you understand," said the voice. "The Imperium is not dying. It is awakening. And awakening always feels like loss." Alecto's presence shimmered beside him. Her armor no longer metal but thought. She was radiant and terrible, her form woven from memory itself. "You would dissolve yourself into them," she said softly. "Into all of them. You would become what they imagine, what they fear, what they love. You would scatter your divinity like dust in the wind." The Emperor's voice grew quieter, fainter, as if he were speaking from the other side of existence. "That is what I have always been. Dust that remembers fire." Acastian reached toward the fading light, desperate to hold on to something, a command, a sign, anything that would tell him this was not the end. "You cannot leave us," he whispered. "Without you, the Astronomican will die. The warp will devour the galaxy." "No," came the answer. "The Astronomican will change. It was never my light alone. It was the reflection of humanity's hope. My flame kept it steady, but it was you who kept it burning." He felt the truth in those words like a knife pressed gently into the heart, not pain, but clarity. The Emperor had never ruled as a god because he wanted to. He had ruled because they needed him to. His sacrifice was never the hunger for worship, but the refusal to abandon them to their own shadows. And now, as that shadow began to fade, he was letting go. All around. Visions unfolded, fragments of futures that might yet be. He saw worlds rebuilding without decree, where the name of the Emperor was spoken not in fear but in gratitude. He saw men and women wielding power without worship. He saw priests burning their scriptures to keep the cold away, and beyond all that he saw something new. The warp itself shifting, bleeding color, its storms quieting as consciousness replaced chaos. Alecto's voice trembled. "You would become thought without shape. You would risk annihilation." The light pulsed softly in response. "Annihilation is only another name for freedom." And then, as though the universe inhaled, the throne began to dim. The great golden glow that had sustained humanity for millennia drew inward, folding upon itself like a dying star collapsing into silence. The Astronomican flared across the galaxy, brighter, fiercer, more beautiful than ever, and then vanished. Billions cried out in terror. Ships in the warp screamed through the void, their navigators blinded as the beacon of light went dark. But the darkness was not empty. For those who dared to look, a new pattern appeared. Not a single star of guidance, but a constellation of many. Small lights scattered yet connected, burning with mortal resolve. Every human mind that believed, not in divinity but in the possibility of purpose, became a spark. Acastian watched it unfold with tears that no longer had weight. The galaxy glittered like a field of living stars, each one a heartbeat, each one echoing the same rhythm as the throne. Humanity had become its own Astronomican. The Emperor's voice was faint now, carried on the wind between atoms. Do you see? The light was never mine alone. I only held it long enough for you to remember it was yours. Acastian fell to his knees, his hands clasped in wordless devotion. And what of you? I will remain in what they become. The last pulse of light radiated outward, gentle and final. It crossed worlds, threading through time, touching every mind that still bore the echo of faith. The warp howled, not in rage but in mourning. The chaos gods roared as their reflection shattered, their forms bending, twisting into something unrecognizable. For the first time in history, the warp did not devour light. It reflected it, and in that reflection a figure stood, golden, human, smiling. Not a god, but a man who remembered love. The light faded. The chamber was still. The throne was silent. Acastian lay upon the marble, smoke rising from his armor, his eyes wide and empty. He felt the absence like cold wind against skin that had never known air. Alecto knelt beside him, her hand resting against his shoulder. The glow within her eyes had softened, dimmed to something mortal. It's done, she whispered. He's gone. Acastian looked toward the throne, dark now, lifeless. And yet, within that darkness, he felt something vast and gentle, the lingering hum of a heartbeat, faint but steady. No, he said. He's everywhere. And as he spoke, the sky above Terra began to glow, not golden this time, but the pale light of dawn, the first true dawn in 10,000 years. And so, beneath the eternal sky of Terra, the light that once belonged to a god was scattered into the hearts of men. The golden throne stood silent, not as a tomb but as a mirror, a monument to a truth too vast for prayer. The Emperor of mankind did not die, nor did he rise. He simply remembered what it meant to be. The Astronomican no longer burned as a singular flame, but as a constellation of human spirit. Billions of souls finding their own light across the void. The Imperium, fractured yet alive, began to breathe again, no longer sustained by divinity but by the fragile, defiant will to exist. And somewhere in the endless dark, a whisper drifted across the stars, the faint echo of a voice older than empire, carrying the final words of the one who had guided them for 10,000 years. Do not seek me in the throne. Seek me in the fire you carry. The custodian Acastian watched the new dawn rise over Terra and bowed his head, not in worship, not in mourning, but in understanding. The age of gods had ended. The age of man had begun again, and thus the story closes, not with apocalypse but awakening. If you felt this story echo in your blood, if you too believe that light endures even when gods grow silent, then let your voice join ours. Like, share, and subscribe, and not for numbers but for remembrance. For stories like this are how we keep the stars alive. Until our next tale unfolds under the glow of the Astronomican, this has been Beyond the Imperium, where legends never die. They only remember.